Brett McKay here, and welcome to another edition of the Art of Manliness Podcast. Well, you've seen them on TV's Ultimate Fighter. MMA fighters who pummel each other to bloody pulps, all for the taste of glorious victory. But what sort of mindset does it take to step into a ring and face down another man whose only goal is to either knock you out or put you in some painful submission hold until you tap out? Well, our guest today has written 2 books on this topic. His name is Sam Sheridan, and he's the author of 2 books on fighting, The Fighter's Heart and The Fighter's Mind. In addition to writing and fighting, Sam has worked as a merchant marine, sailed around the world, became a smoke jumper, and has worked in Antarctica. Sounds like Ernest Hemingway here. Well, Sam, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, Sam, the first thing I want to talk about, kind of ask you about your background. You have a really interesting resume. You were a merchant marine right out of high school. You went to Harvard. You sailed around the world. You studied Muay Thai in Bangkok. You're also a smoke jumper, and then you worked in Antarctica as well. I mean, what drives you to take on these different challenges and adventure? I mean, you sound like a really man's man type of Ernest Hemingway character.
You know, it never was a real plan. It sort of evolved that way. And let me clarify: I was never a smoke jumper. I was a hot shot, and I got offered a smoke jumping job, but I never was able to take it because I started writing. But it's a tough question why these things happen. I think a lot of it is just the way my life evolved. I sort of I liked the options that came up, and I took some and said no to others. And the merchant marine, I wasn't ready to go to college. I wanted to do something else, and the opportunity came up. It's funny when you look at my resume; it makes people laugh because it's a little ridiculous. But that was never the plan. That was never a goal to sort of set out to do a lot of crazy things. It's always been just day to day, option to option, what looks good in the future and what seems like a good time. Part of it is I'm going to go work in Antarctica. That doesn't sound like a good time, but if you say I'm going to go work in Antarctica next year, oh yeah, what the hell? It's next year. So then it just gets closer, and all of a sudden you've signed up and bought the tickets and you're going. So you might as well just go at that point. So nothing special, just willingness is all.
Well, so you've written 2 books on fighting, and I've read both, and they're very interesting. Kind of their memoirs / kind of sports writing. And your first one was called The Fighter's Heart. In that book, you call fighting an anti-video game. What do you mean by that?
When I started sparring and started fighting, it was a revelation in terms of how exciting it was and how present you had to be. I think a lot of that has to do with consequences. Video games and a lot of the modern world, there's not a lot of consequence for what we do. There's not a lot of you're never at risk. You're never really putting yourself physically at risk. And the thrill and the excitement of doing that, but it's still a very safe and prescribed and civilized manner. I mean, you're wearing a mouth guard and you're wearing headgear and you're wearing big gloves usually when you're boxing, and more importantly, your opponent has agreed to do the same and to abide by the same rules. So that it's a very civilized endeavor, really. I mean, it sort of has some appearances of brutality, but it's actually extremely refined, and it can sort of make you feel alive. I think was what really drew me to it in the beginning. It shocked me kind of maybe out of my stupor a little bit. And I do think that the video game world is a place that lulls you to sleep a little bit.
So Sam, how do you think fighting relates to manliness? And do you think most men have this desire to fight?
Oh, of course. I think you're dealing with millions of years of evolution and your reptilian brain and your genetic desire to survive. So you're going to have reasons and urges to fight in you, no matter how they may manifest themselves. Whether it's ping pong, whether it's chess, whether it's in conversation, men and women to some extent, they're going to seek to dominate, and you're going to want to try to express your ideas and control things. One of the fun things about actual fighting is you're getting back to your much more primal flight or fight responses and into your kind of, you're getting down into your reptilian brain or whatever. You're getting sort of back to the basics on that stuff.
And do you think, why do you think it's...
So anyway, let me just go back to manliness. I think pop culture and the way we see, the manly men is fighting's a part of that. But I think, the desire is in everyone. It's a little suppressed in modern times, sure, but it is definitely part of. It's an integral part of being a man and human nature, and you can't completely suppress it because it just manifests itself in other ways. I mean, I've had these crazy discussions with psychiatrists who are trying to, one-up me on radio shows that, fighting is this and that, and what I say to them is, oh, you're fighting me right now, just in this conversation. You're looking to dominate this conversation and win social points, and it's just a different arena, So it's all definitely part and parcel for manhood.
So, Sam, you kind of touched on it a little bit. Fighting is both celebrated for its discipline, encouraged, but also reviled for its violence. How do you reconcile the two? How do you reconcile the morality of fighting?
Yeah, I actually don't see them as in conflict. I understand where the problem comes with it, and some of it's semantic, some of it's fighting. I mean, to me, violence is about, it happens when one party involved is not willing, right? So it's if a criminal attacks somebody, that's violence, and fighting in a bar often is violent because somebody's just trying to have a good night and somebody else wants to fight, and that's not what I'm talking about at all, and that's not what I'm interested in, and that's not what I write about. I mean, for two athletes to compete and to meet each other in a ring or a cage in this kind of primitive combat, going back to kind of our earliest, most evolutionarily old memories of fighting. But yet again, like I say, it's civilized. It's there's a referee there. There's rules. There's mixed martial arts, they call it no holds barred, but there's something like 54 holds you can't do. There's basically there's almost no permanent damage done. At least that's the theory. Mm-hmm. Of course, there is the brain damage done and concussions, but that we can get into that at a different time. I mean, the idea being that you're fighting without tearing somebody's eyeballs out.
Yeah,
you're not fish hooking people. You're not doing if they tap, the fight's over. If they submit to you, so it's really about you're enforcing your will. It's really about choosing and being supreme about your will. And I think that is actually one of the reasons that people are drawn to fighting, and especially to watching it, because it's a little bit of what you're seeing is kind of like fighters valuing their free will over everything else. That's what it comes down to, and we all kind of can get behind that. It's because if you get knocked out or I submit you've given up your will, right? I get to do whatever I want. I'm the victor. To the victor go the spoils. The idea that you're willing to fight me to the death, in quotations, to protect that free will is kind of admirable and heroic in a way that fighting me for money is not so interesting. And that's actually not what it's about, I don't think, either.
One thing I've noticed, but I think it's really interesting about MMA fighters or any fighter, boxers, etc. I've met and have interacted with quite a few, and they look very ominous. They have tattoos, they got the shaved head, just huge bulking guys, and in the ring they just look angry and violent. But then outside of the ring, these are some of the nicest, most humblest guys I've ever met in my entire life. What do you think accounts for this dichotomy? I mean, what's going on there?
Well, it's interesting. I think that was kind of what drew me to fighting in the first place when I was living in Thailand, and I sort of realized that the very best fighters in the camp were also the most devout Buddhists and the most humble guys in the camp, which I kind of struggled to understand at the time. And usually the third-tier fighters were cocky and arrogant and had something to prove. And, it goes to a lot of things. But one of them is fighting is about identity. You have to know who you are. And when you know who you are, you're more relaxed. You're a more comfortable person. You don't, say I'm a tall, skinny white guy. I don't fight like Floyd Mayweather. I don't stand in the pocket. I have to know my identity. I have to fight like who I am and make my strengths and weaknesses all strengths. So it really forces you to know who you are And I know that I'm not a world beater, right? I know that I'm not a one-punch knockout guy, and I can't back that up because I've been in there with those guys and they smash me. So you sort of can't hide, in a sense, in fighting. You're really exposed. And I think what's interesting with professionals, and as they have success, they're very exposed. I mean, you have someone who stands up in front of millions of people, essentially in his underwear. His heart, his courage, his ability to think, his character is on display, and everybody gets to see it and judge it. Of course, he's concealing things. Fighting in martial arts is about deception, but he's hiding it in plain sight, and a lot of it he can't hide, or she can't hide. So I think that goes to making them a more relaxed person. The other thing is often, if you want to be great at something, particularly fighting, you have to keep growing. You have to keep learning. You have to be able to put yourself underneath new teachers and absorb their lessons. Because the minute you start getting comfortable and say, "Oh, hey, I know everything," you're gonna get beat. And this is what every professional, from Randy Couture to Abiyeh Haroun to all kinds of guys, they say this kind of thing. So I used to think, great fighters became humble, and I think what I realized was that actually you don't become great unless you are humble. There's a little bit of a chicken and an egg going on there. The guys who can't suppress their ego hit a ceiling in terms of how much their natural raw talent will take them. And you see that in every sport. You see really talented basketball players who can't keep growing, can't keep learning, and they hit a point, and then the guy who can all of a sudden is beating them. And I think that's just more obvious in fighting. And finally, fighting is really certainly professional fighting, which is what I was sort of interested in and writing about. Was it is a way for particularly damaged people to kind of find a place in society and find something they can excel at, and find a place where their fear and anger can be really used in a positive way to make to generate a career for themselves. And one of the things that would happen was that, once these guys who have these chips on their shoulders start fighting professionally, they really have nothing to prove outside the ring. They know they're tough now. They don't have to prove they're tough to everybody at this bar. They've gotten up in the cage and they've fought really tough guys and proved it on a really high level. So a lot of the chatter falls away. A lot of the kind of the radio interference of the static of a tough guy in a bar giving them a glare that might in the past have led to a fight. Now they don't care, and they can't care. They don't have time. They're too tired. They have to take care of their bodies because they're an investment now. You know what I mean? They owe it to themselves and their trainer not to get hurt. So that's part of it too.
In your second book that just recently came out, The Fighter's Mind, you go across the world interviewing fighters from different disciplines and find out how they approach a fight mentally. What do successful fighters have in common when it comes to the psychological aspect of fighting? I guess humility is one you just mentioned. Are there any other ones?
Yeah, there was a couple different things, but certainly the ability to learn and keep growing was just, you'd hear it from everyone all the time, from Dan Gable and to Kenny Florian. And I talked to chess players and ultramarathoners, and you'd always hear kind of things like that. And I guess there are a few other things, but that was one of the big ones that was sort of really ubiquitous. And I kind of, again, it goes to identity and knowledge and kind of being unwilling to, you may never be Muhammad Ali, right? But you can be the greatest version of Brett there is, the best Brett fighter there is. Or I could be the best Sam fighter out there, and that's an interesting thing is, taking your strengths and weaknesses and seeing how they could be most effective. And that's kind of something that everybody can get behind, is sort of, self-knowledge and really fully utilizing your own strengths, I think, is an important, interesting lesson from these guys.
And do you think these lessons that you've taken from these men, are they applicable to other areas of life? I mean, can an average Joe who's never probably going to fight?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my wife, for instance, is director, and she recommends The Fighter's Mind, my second book, to everyone, because all her director friends, because there's just things about like dealing with fear and how you get over fear and how you deal with loss. Dealing with early success, you get guys who do really well in the beginning, and then they get scared to lose. And what happens when you get scared to lose? You start losing. The fear becomes the problem, and you're not doing the things that made you successful in the first place. So there's a lot of lessons, I think. And fighting, again, it's just like life, and that's why you mentioned Hemingway and Joyce Carol Oates and Norman Mailer, and everybody's been drawn to fighting and boxing and prize fighting and things like that. It's just it's just like life, only more obvious. It's just that everything's very plain and kind of out there to be looked at and thought about, which is why I think a lot of writers and filmmakers and find drama there.
What about failure? I mean, is failure an important part of the success
Absolutely.
of a fighter?
Like Renzo Gracie, very, very famous Brazilian fighter, would say, you don't learn anything from victory. You only learn something from your failures. And really what defines your failure is whether you do grow from it, whether you do internalize the lesson, invest in the defeat, which is, again, it sort of gets into like, it almost sounds like self-help books and, 10 tips for successful people, something like that. But some of that's very true. You want to, the guys who get beat and understand what happened and come back stronger and figure out ways to fix that gap, which is, it's funny. Here's one of my little pet peeves is that, you watch a lot of fights and you'll hear fans go, oh, he's making excuses when a fighter loses. He's making excuses, And, it's like, listen, dude, this guy's a professional fighter. This is what he does for a living. If he just says, oh, I can't beat this guy, he's better than me, he's screwed. You know what I mean? That he can't do that mentally. That's not a good strategy. He has to have a reason, a reason he lost and a reason he can win the next time. He needs, his cornermen and his coaches are all giving him reasons, even if they're not true. He needs a reason to think he can win the next time, or else how could he do what he does? So that's just a little pet peeve of mine that kind of illustrates that. You really you need to learn from your losses, and Renzo actually has pictures of all his losses on his walls. Because like he says, you make a mistake in a big fight or a competition, you never make that mistake again. And you lose because of that mistake. You learn. Never he let Sakuraba grab a Kimura on him when he was shaking Sakuraba's back, and Sakuraba broke his arm, and he has that picture on his wall, and it's great because it's like he's never going to take the back like that again because he learned, he really learned a lesson, and I think he was winning the fight and had 30 seconds left or whatever. So anyway, yeah, internalizing defeat, really understanding and growing from defeat, hugely important, and I think everybody has to kind of get on board with that one.
Has fighting changed you as a man?
It's hard to say. I guess so, probably. I think it's tough. Certainly, I'm probably a lot more athletic and physical than I would be if I hadn't been doing a sport for the last 10 years. And normally you get out of college and pretty much that's it for sports unless you're going pro. So for me to keep doing things physically was an interesting kind of a journey. I've become much more athletic. Has it changed me as a man? I don't know. It's hard to say. I would say probably I'm a little, more confident and relaxed about confrontation than I was. And part of it's just the mystery's gone. It's a little bit, it's a little bit like sex. Before you ever have sex, it's a huge mystery. Wonderful and terrifying. And oh my God, what's it going to be like? And then you have sex, and it's it's great, but it's not a totally different outside of all the other experiences you ever had. You're not in a dream state or whatever. So I think getting to that with fighting, there's a lot of misunderstandings about what having someone punch you in the face is about until you get it done. and done repeatedly, it's sort of hard to understand it. And it's not good for you, I'm not saying go out there and let people beat you up, but it's, I think, really important just to understand the urgency and the speed at which violence can happen, and the kind of intensity that you need to be at, that you do it a little bit, and for everyone really to get a feel for it, and to just to broaden their understanding. But I'm that kind of guy. I think everybody should do everything, because I think understanding is the key to the universe, and you're only gonna broaden your understanding by doing, basically.
All right. Well, Sam, if there's a man listening to this podcast and he's like, man, I want to start fighting, what steps would you recommend that he take to get started?
I would say find a gym, and find a gym that's close. To me, I'm never going to go more than about 15, 20 minutes to a gym. That's just the way I am. So either I have to go live over the gym, or I find something really close to home. But there's a ton of MMA gyms out there now. I would shop around. For instance, if you live in a big city, I'm sure there's probably 10 MMA gyms that are in your city. They should all give you at least one free class. Go roll around on the floor and wrestle with some people, and see how the vibe is. If the gym gives you a good vibe, great, and it's very personal, and it's very much what experience you have. And listen, there are plenty of gyms that won't give you a good vibe, and you won't have a good time. And screw those places. Don't go in there, because it's just not worth it. You can waste too much time and money and get injured and all that stuff. So don't go in and say, hey, I want to fight. Because listen, MMA coaches and trainers, they hear that all the time. Like, oh, I want to fight. I want to be in the UFC. It's who cares? Everybody wants to fight. You need to, give me 6 months of getting into the gym every day, and then tell me you want to fight. And then see how you feel, and it'll tell you a lot. Those first month or two. And some people love it, and some people it's too tiring, and that's the way it is. So I would just shop around and try a few gyms and get a feel for it, and then just sort of go with what your gut says. Go with your intuition on that.
All right. Well, Sam, thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely, no problem. My pleasure.
Our guest today was Sam Sheridan. Sam is the author of 2 books on fighting. His first is called A Fighter's Heart, and his most recent book is called A Fighter's Mind. And you can pick up both of those books at major bookstores and Amazon.com. Well, that wraps up another edition of the Art of Manliness Podcast. For more manly tips and advice, make sure to check out the Art of Manliness website at artofmanliness.com. And until next time, stay manly.